it creates an opportunity to connect home to school for the adults in that space. Because I think the adults in our spaces often walk between two places where they wonder where their value is.
We are surrounded by content. Content shapes who we follow, how we lead, what we buy, and even what we believe. Welcome to the Content Generation Podcast, a class intercom production where we focus on the stories that come to life in schools all over the world. We highlight the students, educators, and communities who share the content that shapes our future. Welcome back to the Content Generation Podcast. We have a really exciting guest today. Dr. Jill, I know that you, this is a hero of yours in this space, and he has very quickly become a hero of mine. As I was sharing with you, there were a couple moments on the podcast where I was moved myself, and I have some things that I'm literally going to go work on.
Yeah, he's just an inspiring person to be around, and I believe it was 10 years ago. I think it was 2014 that I first heard him speak, and then also got a copy of his book on branding. And I was inspired by the Go Crickets. And when he threw T-shirts out into the crowd, I actually got one of those. So I did sport a Go Crickets shirt for a couple of years, even before I started as AP. And maybe I blame Dr. Joe for some of the things I got myself into with social media and branding and marketing at schools, because it really, really spoke to me the importance of telling your story and getting other people excited about your story, and making sure that that's known. And so that's something we did at Seward High, and it's just been awesome to be able to carry that on now and help inspire others.
Well, Dr. Joe Sanfelippo has an amazing history, and I know that we've both been running into him in the conference circuit, but he's been making an impact at his school. Towards the end of the interview, he starts to share some of the stats even that are inspiring in enrollment numbers and the things that it's driving there. But as he says, there's great things happening in every school, but not everybody knows about it.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And he's just a really good storyteller. He doesn't do it in a fancy way and doesn't need to, but it's truly authentic. So whether he's taking the spot of the custodian for the day and sharing her story, or if he is, promoting the subs in the district, the substitute teachers, and giving them T-shirts, he's getting people, getting positions filled where everyone else across the country is struggling. And it isn't just by chance or because of who he is. It's the work that district continues to do, even now that he's retired as superintendent.
Yeah. So not only recruiting faculty, but drawing students, and I think there's just some great lessons there and some richness in the content and really, like you said, the authenticity that Joe's presenting is just fantastic. With that, we'd love to have you listen to Joe. Well, welcome back to the Content Generation Podcast. I am really excited today to have Joe Sanfelippo joining us. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Hey, it's great to get to talk to you from I've got so many questions for you, but really when we think about a lot of the work you've done to really help educators, to help schools really establish brand, to establish the way they talk about their school. I'd love to hear a little bit of what you're hearing about communications right now, as there's been a lot of change in schools, and I'd love to hear about what you've been talking about lately.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. I think one of the biggest problem with schools, honestly, in my eyes, it has nothing to do with schools and everything to do with people thinking that they know what happens in schools. So the problem is when people think they know what happens in schools, then they talk about what they think happens in schools, and that's not what happens in schools. But they talk about it like they know exactly what happens there because they all went to school. So the question becomes, how are we putting ourselves in a position to make sure that the great things that are happening in the space are the ones that are being talked about, as opposed to the ones that are being talked about from 25 years ago. And I think that goes beyond just talking about what happens in schools. I think it really goes into your willingness to leverage certain pieces of the communication structure to make sure that people know and understand what's going on in these spaces. It's not enough to just talk about it anymore. It's got to be more about leveraging the platform. It's got to be about leveraging the emotion. It's got to be about leveraging the connection and giving everybody an opportunity to talk about your school when you're not there to talk about your school.
Mm. Yeah, I love the soundbite about talking about us when no one's there. Right, that's brand in a
Right.
nutshell. One of the things I've heard you say before, and it's been documented, nobody is changing the way they talk about us until we change the way we talk about us.
Yeah.
And how are you starting to really shift that narrative for a lot of educators? I know, talking with Dr. Jill, she said, some of your earliest work talking about crickets was
Mhm.
really some of the things that really changed the way she operated as a principal. But how are you shifting that narrative right now?
Well, I think our job, if it, not being in the school right now, I'm just trying to help people try to create, almost a presence when they're not there. And like you said, that's just kind of the brand in terms of what happens. But I think a lot of times we're our worst enemy when it comes down to what happens in schools. And if
Hmm.
we're not talking about the great things that are going on, people start to wonder if there are great things going on. And so we can be out here complaining about how we're not valued and how we're not seen and how we're not heard. But if we go out into the public and we're not out there actively talking about the great work that's happening, then I think we're part of the issue, right? So, I mean, it comes to like, I can't stop people from saying negative things about what happens in school. But if it's the only thing that they hear, this is who we become. And I'm not slamming school staff for that, because when it comes down to it, if that's how you feel, like, then you're not going to go make up some like toxic positivity conversation about how great it is in that spot. But at the same time, if you're not willing to say some of the great, or talk about some of the great things that are happening, then we put ourselves in a really difficult position. The question for our group years ago was, are you willing to say something great about a colleague? Because if you don't want to brag on yourself, I get that. I totally
Yeah.
understand that. But that does not preclude you from talking great about the person that teaches next door. So if you just start there and make sure that you extend one conversation to people who don't normally see the great work that happens in those spaces, then you give yourself a better chance for the next conversation that happens whenever that conversation takes place.
Hmm. I love that thought, and it's a great model of humility. Thinking about promoting the people, or we call it around here, being somebody else's hype person.
Yeah.
When you think about the way schools are positioned today, getting them started talking about the person next door. What's your advice on getting them started?
Well, I think the first thing is so we kind of took it on in three different capacities, right? So if you live in a world um, where you're willing to recognize the greatness of a colleague, acknowledge the greatness of a colleague, and extend the greatness of a colleague. And of a colleague is important because it's really hard to take care of kids when we're not taking care of the adults, taking care of the kids. So the thing that we talk about is your willingness to, first and foremost, like you asked, put yourself in the right mindset to recognize the great things that are happening around you, which means, what are you doing to put yourself in that mindset? It's how you start your day. If you start your day and you walk into your classroom or you walk into your office and you turn your computer on and you grab a cup of coffee and then you go right to your email and then you respond to emails and then you sign some forms and then you get into the hallway and connect with your colleagues, you've essentially put yourself in a really tough mindset. I mean, outside of coffee, there are not a lot of good things on that list that I just, that I just talked
Yeah.
about. Because essentially, when you open up your email, you're transferring somebody else's to-do list to yours. And now that's on your mind. And so when that's on your mind, you're not going to see clearly the things that are going on around you. So whatever it is to put yourself in the right mindset, then all of a sudden we put ourselves in a situation where we can kind of keep the momentum going on a consistent basis. The other that's the first thing. I mean, I guess when it comes down to it, in terms of how you start it by making sure that you're in the right mindset to have the conversation, which means taking a look at what you do all day, every day to start that day to put yourself in the right mindset.
And you've written about this, but starting your day off that way is part of what you began with years ago. When was your first book published?
Oh, goodness. I want to say 2015, 14, something like that.
Okay. So we're about 10 years ago, right? So from, and that was, you were taking some walks to school and recording some of those moments and sharing those key moments 10 years ago. How has that sort of changed your trajectory? How's it changed how you think about leadership and schools?
Yeah, I think the walks didn't start till probably 2018. So I mean that was like 6 years ago. The first book was The Power of Branding, and that was like 2014 when we were just talking about how we could help brand schools in a different capacity. But the walks, when I started the walks, I think what ended up happening, the interesting thing about the walks was it was almost ironic because I just started walking. I live across the street from school. So I would get up on a Saturday morning and I'm super loud. So I would just be waking everybody up that wanted to sleep in. So I decided just to start walking to school and hanging out there and maybe doing some work while I'm there. But in doing that, I started thinking about leadership a little bit differently. And as I was walking, I started, not only thinking about, but then talking about it. And then people started to like it. So I kept thinking, oh, now I got to do it some more. And then I kind of started to like it and then kind of turned into something bigger than I thought it was going to be. But I think the thing about the walks were more for me than they were for anybody else because they were constant reflection on what things that I've screwed up and things that I didn't want to screw up anymore. And that was the best part for me in doing those walks was I couldn't put a bunch of garbage out there that I didn't believe in or that didn't happen because I had 130 staff members that would have just called me out on it. So they were very supportive of the walks because they knew that's kind of what we were going through. They knew that this was the opportunity to celebrate the work, but they knew it wasn't a bunch of garbage that, we were just kind of making up along the way. They were all real stories and they were all real feelings at the time. So I think the authenticity of the conversation probably is the thing that helped, helped us kind of get some momentum.
As a leader and manager, one of the things that sometimes gets in my head as a content creator is that the thing I'm really focused on is like that next coaching session or like that personnel sort of conversation that I don't know how to translate that. That's what I'm really passionate. I'm in the moment on that. And then I go to make content and that's what I'm thinking about. How do you move yourself in and around that as a content creator?
I think trying to stay in the moment probably is the best thing to do. And that's really hard, but I think the first thing that I tried to do from a leadership lens was not be the fixer for all this stuff. And I think that was really, really hard for me because I felt like I had the answer. You know what I mean? So when you have the answer, you just want to tell them the answer. Like, well, here's the answer. Just do it this way and you'll be fine. And so what ended up happening to me when I was doing that was, you have kind of two types of people that are working in the district. And one is a group that truly wants to be helped and to get better. And they want your coaching to help them get better. And then there's another group. It's a smaller group, a very, very small group, comparatively speaking. But that's the group that just wants you to fix their stuff. And a lot of times because they feel overwhelmed, but they just want their stuff off their plate. So when they say to you, I need some help with this, knowing that you're just going to do it for them, then this is the group that you spend all your time with, because the other group stops asking you questions because they know you're just going to do it. They don't want you to do it. They want to be coached through it. But when you decide you're just going to do it, now you're spending your time with the group that just wants their stuff done. And all the people that want to get better stop coming to you. So now all of a sudden you put yourself in a really difficult position. So I kept thinking about it that way, where if I can stay in this question mentality, if I can ask questions and stay there and be present and stay there, then it does two things. The first thing that it does is it keeps me in the moment. But the second thing that it does is it really stops me from giving suggestions. So if I can ask more questions that support where they're coming from, now I don't feel as though I have to jump in with the answer, because I know that I'm just going to ask the question next.
Yeah, I love. Thanks for the coaching. Yeah, as I think there's a lot of really great leadership advice there, and a lot of really good content creation advice. One of the areas you talk a lot about is in the area of storytelling and narrative format. As whether you're a superintendent, principal, or school communicator, how does this narrative format really affect how you're developing that? Not necessarily giving the answer, but you're creating that narrative format in each of these.
Yeah, the thing is that you're creating the narrative of your school district with literally every interaction. And that's really, like, that's a lot of pressure if you think about it as pressure. But if you think about it as, a chance to get more content out, then it changes. And the reason is this. So, like, if people are so stuck on what happened to them 25 years ago, and they remember one incident that happened 25 years ago, but it was the only incident that they remember 25 years ago, because they're still cranked up about it, that's what they're going to talk about. So when we can put ourselves in a spot where we're creating more of those content opportunities, then maybe the one thing that blasted them isn't the one thing that they're going to get talked about. Or even though they didn't feel good about that one thing, they still have a lot of other stuff that they remember that was pretty good. So maybe it kind of calms down the one thing that got them jacked up, and they don't get real as loud about the one thing that got jacked up because they remember all of the other things. So it really kind of comes down to all these interactions. And if we treat every one of them like that's the one that's going to be remembered, it just gives us a better chance. It doesn't automatically, like, guarantee success, but it puts us in a better mindset, and it gives us a better chance to be talked about the way that we want to be talked about. None of this stuff is perfect. Like, I don't have all the answers. I'm certainly not going to pretend to. But if I can lean into every interaction, it just gives me a better chance, gives our school a better chance, gives our community a better chance to be talked about the way that we want to be talked about.
Well, I love where we started, where you said people think they know what happens at a school.
Yeah.
To now, if we've got a lot more content coming out from the school, now all of a sudden people might know more about what's happening in a school, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you sort of, like, invite others into this journey with you? Now, I think for a lot of schools, they're starting to look at how can they invite students to become a part of this? How can they invite other faculty to be a part of this content creation story that's being built? What does that look like to invite others?
I think, well, first you have to be active with the invitation and say that you need some help, because, everybody's overwhelmed. But I think if you can be the one that says, hey, to a second grade teacher, I love what you do. I loved watching you build towers with your kids, man. That was awesome. And I loved how you looked when you were talking about it. So can I get a kid for like 5 minutes to talk about what that looked like? And maybe if you can give me a couple minutes, that would be great too. I'm not going to take I'm going to take 10 minutes of your time. That's all I'm going to take. I know you don't have any extra time, but can I just take 10 minutes of your time so I could tell that story or help you tell that story? And then you get it out there. I think that's the first thing. But the second thing that I think people really miss out on is again, it goes back to the leverage point. It's not even about the story. It's about the leverage point of the story. So let's say that the second grade teacher that I just talked to, that's doing great things, that I decided that I want to put, a podcast out, or I want to put a video out or whatever like that. Why instead of just putting it out, why don't you, call that teacher's husband or call that teacher's mom or call that teacher's friend and say, hey, I'm going to put something on our social media feed here in the next 15 minutes. And I wanted you to hear it first because it was awesome.
Yeah.
And she was so excited. And I just wanted you to hear it because she was super excited about it. So what happens then? The next 10, 15 minutes, people are getting ready to just blast that thing out because they want to brag on it. And then you're not the one bragging on it. Now you're finding somebody else to do it for you. And that ends up creating some more, well, it creates two things. The first thing that it creates is more opportunity for your school district because people start talking about it differently. It also creates an opportunity to talk about some of the great things that are going on. But most importantly for me, honestly, is that it creates an opportunity to connect home to school for the adults in that space. Because I think the adults in our spaces often walk between two places where they wonder where their value is. They're at school and they're thinking about what they're missing at home. They're at home and they're thinking about all the stuff they have to do at school. They're sitting on their couch at 6 o'clock thinking about, while they're with their kids, thinking about other people's kids. This is what happens to us. And that's not changing. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we can, as leaders in these spaces, connect those two places with that leverage point, just making the call home or sending a text to the spouse or an email, just saying, hey, I'm going to put this out. Just want to let you know. Or you see them doing something great thing. We have in our building, because we're a K-12 building, I would see a third grade teacher doing great things and tell the third grade teacher she's doing great things. But I also know that the third grade teacher had a junior son in the high school. So I'm going to go tell the junior son about the great things that his mom was doing. Like all of that stuff it's all leverage points, but it's all authentic. I'm not making stuff up. It's real. I just want to make sure that it's being talked about the way that it should be talked about.
I love that concept. And I want to hear a little bit of what that changes culturally when you're doing that, because you're doing some really sophisticated stuff from a communications perspective, but it's also a really important role in a leadership development that you're doing at the same time. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that really affects a culture.
Well, I think I don't know. Yeah, that's a really great question because I guess you don't really see it. You know what I mean? Like people will ask me, they'll say, hey, we'd love to come to Fall Creek. We just want to see what it looks like. And I'm like, you know what? You're going to walk through a hallway and you're probably going to see the same things that you see in a lot of schools, right? Like you can see it, but here's the difference for me is that I know when I walk into a school across the country, anywhere, I can tell what the culture is in the first 5 minutes that I'm there. It's how you're greeted at the door. It's how the adults are interacting with each other. So if I know that, then that's something that we talk to our staff about. Because when people are in the building, first of all, we want to make sure that they're supposed to be in the building. But there's a way to make sure that they're supposed to be in the building without saying, hey, are you supposed to be here? Right? It's the interaction that we have with that person that gets them to the office or where they're going to be. So how are the and they're going to, if they're walking through the hallway and they are supposed to be there and they got their name badge on or whatever it is, and they're walking down the hallway, they're going to see how the adults are talking to each other. They're going to see how the adults are talking to kids. Like they're going to see that. So if you know that you're always on point for that, then I think it changes how we do it. And we started doing it. We started first time. I started talking about this before I was in Fall Creek. Probably 2005 or 6. And I just said, like, they're going to start talking about us at some point. And what do you want them to say? And you know what? I told our group that I had at Roosevelt Elementary School in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, look, the work that you're doing is incredible. And I'm going to tell you right now that people are going to show up to see what you're doing. What do you want them to see when they walk in? Because they're coming. I know they're coming because of the work that you do. They're going to show up. So when they show up, you better be ready for it, which means they're going to see how we interact with each other. They're going to see the connections that we have with each other. They're going to see how the adults talk to each other. They're going to see that. So let's make sure that when they see that, they talk about it differently when they walk away from it.
Why do you feel like now, with all the changes that have happened in schools over the last, we'll say 10 years, but like, why do you feel like now is more important than ever for a narrative format and helping to develop that reputation as a school?
I think it's important for a couple reasons. And the first one is that I think that there are less people that have decided that this is the profession that they want to get into. And that's hard. I love, man, my son's going to be an English teacher, and I couldn't be happier about that. I mean,
Yeah,
people are saying, "Well, I don't want my kid to be a teacher." I do. I mean, think about the impact that you
yeah,
have on everybody on a daily basis, and if you can find the right spot where you feel valued, it's a great job. So I think that's the first thing, is that people aren't getting into it. The second thing is that there are so many forms of media, and there are so many opportunities for connections and documentation, that I think a lot of people feel like they're always on a stage, and that's really tough. It's an opportunity, but it's really, really tough. So if people are going to record something in a moment that you don't want them to record, you better have 10 more things that are solid, that are out there, to kind of combat the one that didn't go the way that you wanted. Because something's going to happen. My school districts are like my father-in-law describes people in deer in Wisconsin. There are two types of people in Wisconsin: those who have hit a deer and those who will. There are two types of school districts in the world: those who have gone through struggle and crisis, and those who will.
mm,
So, if you just think about it, that it's going to happen at some point. What are all the interactions looking like before you get to that point, so you don't feel like that's the only thing that they're going to judge you for along the way?
yeah, yeah. We don't know when they're going to evaluate us.
No.
We don't know when crisis is going to happen. But you've sort of advocated for this. You're sort of like stacking up a bank of
Mhm.
content, right? That is
Yeah.
positive, and it's a proactive stance. And you've really led a charge there of a proactive stance of flooding the positivity there.
Mhm.
Um, and it seems like you've been traveling the country sharing this more and more lately. I've
Yeah.
seen you hitting more conference circuits and things like that. That schools need to hear that message. What's your advice in finding more of those stories?
First of all, be willing to see them.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
walk. I think what changed for me was I kept thinking to myself, how many things have I walked past today to get to the next thing that has to get done? And would
Mm.
any of the things that I walked past give me enough joy to bring me back the next day feeling a little bit better about this work? And then I actively started thinking about it differently. You know what I mean? Because they're
Yeah.
everywhere, but we walk past them to get to the next thing that has to get done. And I am beyond honored and humbled. And I can't even believe that people want to hear these stories over and over again. At the same time, I'm going to keep telling them until they tell me to stop, because, we're in this situation where people want to come to school in Fall Creek, Wisconsin. We have open enrollment in Fall Creek, and when we started telling stories of school, it was 2010, and we gapped
Mm.
20 kids that year. So that would mean 20 more kids coming to the school district than going out. In
Wow.
2023, we gapped 135. So, and there's
Wow.
850 kids in the district. So that means 1 in 8 kids in the school district of Fall Creek does not live in the school district of Fall Creek. They just choose to come out here. And we're not doing, we're doing great things, but so are the school districts in our area. The question is, do they hear the stories? And so when they can come out and see the incredible work that happens in this school district, and these people, these adults are like, they're unbelievable. They just lean into each other, and they lean into kids in a way that's incredibly special. But I've been in a lot of schools, and I mean, yeah, a lot of schools do that, but they
Mm.
know what we do. So they
Mm.
choose what they know.
Right. So would you say that there's a confidence from parents, right, that really helps change the culture of your school?
Yeah. Because the confidence, it goes with anything else. The more
Yeah.
prepared you are for anything, the more confident you're going to walk into that situation. The more you know about a school district, the more confidence you're going to walk into that school district with. It's like, it's so simplistic. at the same time, it's one of the hardest things that we do because we feel like we don't have time to do it. And the concept that I think that we have to keep in mind is that time is finite. Like there's not any more time. It's what we do with it. You know what I mean? Like if when people say to me
Yeah.
like, "Well, I don't have time to do that," I guess my response to them is, "Look, you either have time to build the relationship on the front end, or you have time to build back the relationship on the other side of it. So do
Mm.
you want to spend time building, supporting it, or do you want to spend time repairing it? Because that's what you're doing. Either one, you're going to do one of the two. So what do you want? Which is more fun, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
fun to build and support than it is to try to repair. But the relationships that people have to repair are often the ones that people don't see what's going on a lot, and they start to fill in the gaps on those things. It's the same thing with parents and school districts. When people don't know what you do, they make up what you do. But if the knowledge base of what you do is split like in these huge gaps, then people are filling in those gaps.
Mm.
So, what are they going to fill in the gaps with? Are they going to fill in the gaps with positive interactions, or are they going to fill in the gaps with negativity that they heard from somebody else? And then you get the call like, well, here's what I heard from this person that, well, yeah, of course you heard that from that person. I get that. But at the same time, that's on me for not putting out the counter argument to whatever that was.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that concept because really what you're doing is like if parents have confidence, that means that they trust the school and they
Yeah.
trust them because they know what's happening or their perception of what's happening at the school. They feel
Right.
confident in that, right? So
Yeah.
cool. As we're thinking about really affecting the next generation of content creators, right?
Mhm.
This what we call the content generation, but it's something that we're inviting a lot of people into because we
Mhm.
like to see more content creators at schools. What's your message to the next generation of content creators? What should they be watching? What should they be consuming, and how should they be sharing?
Well, maybe the first thing is to like make sure that you are sharing. And I think everybody's like looking for that viral moment. You know what I mean? Like they want that one thing that's going to get a
Yeah.
million views or whatever. And so when they don't get a million views on it, then they get upset, they get frustrated, and all of a sudden it turns into this isn't even worth it at all. And I think the interesting thing about all those walk videos was there are some walk videos that I loved. I thought like this is gold. Like this content
Yeah.
is awesome. Everybody should hear that, and nobody heard it. And then the
Mm.
other ones are I'm like, this is okay, I guess. I mean, those just go bananas. You just never know. But the
Mm.
more that you make, the more confident you'll feel. And then the numbers don't drive whether or not you're happy about the content. And I think that I kind of went on that roller coaster where I was like,
Mm.
well, at first I was just putting stuff out, and then people started to like it. And then I thought, well, why did that like that one more than they like that one? Was it the content? Was it the time of day? Was it how I said it? Was it that I was, making fun of myself? Was there jokes? Was there whatever it was? So you could get into that rabbit hole. And I don't know if I don't think it's worth it, but at the same time, I think you should just be cognizant of what's working and what's not. And it's like the more content that you put out, the more data you're going to have to take a look at to see whether or not see what's working and what's not working, and then you kind of build some momentum along the way. But I think the first thing is making sure that you put content out and you're willing to get in front of it. I think the content for me, there's a reason, and it's going to sound really ridiculous, but at the same time, one of the reasons that I started making the videos and I did stuff on camera a lot, you'd get this, well, Joe, that's kind of all about you. Isn't that all about you? I'm like, okay, so here's the thing. Like, yeah, I'm the one on camera, but guess what? At some point when when something happens in the school district and the cameras show up and they're sitting in your face, you're going to have to know how to feel. You're going to have to know how to respond in that spot. And if the cameras show up and you don't feel confident and you're and and well, I'm kind of, then people stop thinking about the message and start thinking about how you delivered the message, and then therefore make judgments about how you delivered the message. They're like, well, he wasn't very confident. I bet he's lying. He's not telling us the whole truth, man. He was stumbling across that. So I don't think he's telling the truth. So I started doing it a lot just so I felt more confident when something happened. And, I think a lot of leaders need to think about it that way, because they're all going to be put in that spot sometime. And so when you get to that spot, if you know that what you're saying, if you know that people are going to respond to what you're saying as opposed to how you're saying that, now you walk in with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah. I love that that you were approaching it from your own development, and that doesn't get much more authentic than that. And I think that's an inspiration to all of us as content creators to say, hey, sometimes we need to look for our own development and our own content.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
I feel like that's a great message. Joe, I feel like your message for content creators, whether they're just starting or they're established and they're creating a lot of content over and over, is such a valuable message now more than ever. And I really appreciate you sharing it with us and sharing it with educators across the country.
Absolutely. No problem. Hey, keep doing what you're doing. Keep helping people create. And I think that's the conversation that we want to continue. If I can help out, please don't ever hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. And if people are looking for your latest work, where should they look?
Just check the socials. We're all Joe_Sanfelippo, about where you're going to find everything you need to there. Or just give me a call. You can have my phone number. I don't care. 715-577-6623. Give me a shout.
Awesome.
We're here to help people,
Joe.
man. I'm telling you, it's like, I think we do those walk videos, and at the end of the walk video, I always say we're all in this thing together. Well, we're all in this thing together. It doesn't mean we're all in this thing together when it's convenient. If you need something, reach out. We'll try to fix it the best we can, or connect you to people who can.
Absolutely, Joe. We are all in this together, and I appreciate you elevating the role of education, and it's important. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everybody. Go Crickets.